The moment the Australian public crossed that invisible line from quiet irritation to full-blown outrage, something shifted behind palace walls. And not the kind of shift they announce with polished statements and smiling photographs, but the kind that happens in silence, in closed rooms where voices drop low and decisions get sharp, because suddenly, this wasn't just about a $3,200 retreat anymore, it was about a title, a name, a centuries-old institution being turned into what critics are now calling a price tag. And the question echoing through London wasn't, "Is this bad optics?" but "How far has this gone without anyone stopping it?"
Harry and Meghan plan to rebound from this latest flop with another tour of Australia, a spokesperson.
Because while the world was busy scrolling headlines about Meghan's so-called exclusive Besties Retreat in Australia, where attendees were allegedly paying thousands just to be in the same room, something much bigger was brewing underneath. Something far more uncomfortable, because this wasn't just another celebrity appearance, this was being framed, rightly or wrongly, as access to royalty itself, and that is where everything starts to unravel. Because once a royal title becomes a ticket, a package, a premium experience, then what exactly is left of the boundary between duty and business, between service and sale? And insiders, whispering, always whispering, say that's exactly what triggered the moment no one saw coming, the so-called secret meeting, not listed, not announced, not photographed, but pieced together through fragments, through timings that didn't add up, through senior aides suddenly going quiet at the exact moment Australia's petition numbers started climbing. Because yes, the petition wasn't just noise, it was numbers, real numbers, crossing thresholds that governments notice, that palaces cannot ignore, because once over 100,000 voices start saying the same thing, that taxpayer money should not even indirectly touch this, it stops being gossip and starts becoming pressure. And pressure, especially public pressure, is something the monarchy has learned never to underestimate. Now here's where the story twists. Because while Meghan's event was still being promoted as exclusive, empowering, transformational, all the polished language, you had, at the same time, reports emerging that behind the scenes things were tightening, rapidly, almost urgently. Like someone had suddenly realized this wasn't just a PR situation anymore. It was a structural problem, a line being crossed too openly, too boldly, and the timing. That's what made people uneasy. Because why would a meeting, quiet, closed, sudden, happen exactly when the petition explodes? Coincidence or reaction? And the whispers didn't stop there. Because almost immediately after this supposed meeting, something subtle but telling began to shift. Not in grand announcements, but in tone, in classification, in language. Because suddenly the narrative around the Australia visit started being reframed, not as anything remotely official, not even adjacent, but strictly, sharply, almost defensively, as private. And that word, private, became the shield, the distance, the separation. Like a line being drawn in sand that maybe should have been drawn earlier, because now the question wasn't just what Meghan was doing, but whether the system itself had allowed too much ambiguity for too long. And ambiguity, when money is involved, becomes dangerous. Because think about it, what exactly are people paying for? Is it a wellness retreat? A celebrity experience? Or something else entirely? Something unspoken but understood, something tied to a title that carries centuries of weight, history, expectation, and suddenly, price. And that is where the outrage starts to make sense, because it's not just about $3,200, it's about what that money represents, what it implies, what it quietly sells without ever explicitly saying it out loud. And insiders claim that inside that room, the one no cameras saw, this exact question was raised, not dramatically, not emotionally, but coldly, strategically, because this isn't about feelings anymore. It's about precedent. Because if one event can do this, then what stops the next, and the next, and the next, until the line between monarchy and marketplace dissolves completely, and that's when things reportedly turned serious. Because suddenly, discussions weren't just about optics, they were about boundaries, about redefining what is allowed, what is tolerated, and what is absolutely off-limits, and if those reports are even partially true, then what we are witnessing right now isn't just backlash. It's correction, late, reactive, but still correction. Because the monarchy doesn't move fast until it has to. And meanwhile, the event itself, the one that started all this, now sits in a strange, uncomfortable spotlight, because what was once marketed as exclusive now feels questioned, dissected, almost fragile, like the perception around it has shifted overnight. Because perception is everything, and once the word cash grab starts circulating, it doesn't leave easily, it sticks, it spreads, it reshapes everything around it, turning glamour into suspicion, turning access into controversy. And the most unsettling part? The silence. Because no clear denial, no full confirmation, just that carefully controlled quiet that always follows when something sensitive is unfolding behind the scenes. And that silence. It makes people wonder even more, because if nothing significant happened, why the sudden shift? Why the urgency? Why the meeting? And that's where this story refuses to settle, because it's not ending, it's evolving, slowly, quietly, with pieces still hidden, decisions still forming, and a question still hanging in the air. Has the line already been crossed? Or is this the moment it finally gets redrawn? And just when it felt like the storm had reached its peak, something even more unsettling began to surface. Not loud, not official, but in fragments, in sudden shifts, in quiet pullbacks that didn't need explanation because they spoke for themselves. And that's when people started asking the question no one in the palace wanted to hear out loud. Was this already spiraling out of control behind the scenes? Because within hours of that so-called closed-door meeting, the ripple effect didn't come as a dramatic announcement. It came as something far more revealing, distance calculated, deliberate distance, like invisible threads being cut one by one, and suddenly the event that once looked like a high-end, untouchable experience began to look exposed, almost isolated, like the protection it once quietly carried had been withdrawn without ceremony, without warning, leaving it standing alone under a spotlight that had turned harsh, unforgiving, and brutally public. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Because when something is labeled private, especially in royal language, it's not just a description, it's a signal, a boundary, a disclaimer, a way of saying, this is not us. And insiders are now suggesting that this wasn't just routine clarification, it was strategic distancing. The kind that happens when an institution realizes something associated with it is moving in a direction it cannot control, cannot defend, and more importantly, cannot be seen to endorse. And suddenly, everything around Meghan's $3,200 event started to feel different. Not canceled, not officially shut down, but weakened, questioned, surrounded by hesitation. Because here's the part that raised eyebrows across both sides of the story. Reports began circulating that certain behind-the-scenes players, the kind who usually stay comfortably aligned with anything remotely royal, were now hesitating, pausing, reconsidering their involvement. Not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly, which is often far more telling because in these circles, silence and withdrawal speak louder than statements ever could. And the timing again, impossible to ignore. Because this wasn't happening before the petition gained traction. It wasn't happening when the event was first announced. It happened after the outrage crossed a threshold, after the narrative shifted from curiosity to criticism, after the words royal title and cash started appearing in the same sentence too often, too loudly, too dangerously. And that's when another layer of this story started to unfold. The internal tension, not the dramatic kind, not shouting matches or public clashes, but the colder, more calculated kind, where strategy replaces sentiment, where relationships become secondary to reputation, and where one simple question starts to dominate everything. What is the long-term cost of this? Because for years, there has been this fragile, almost uneasy balance between distance and connection, between stepping away and still being tied in some way, and this event, this single, controversial, highly priced event, may have just exposed how unstable that balance really is, because once money enters the picture in such a visible, structured way, it forces clarity, it forces decisions, and clarity is exactly what the palace has historically tried to avoid in this particular situation. But now? Now it seems like avoidance is no longer an option, because insiders are hinting, carefully, cautiously, that what happened in that meeting wasn't just about one event, it was about setting a precedent, about drawing a line that had been blurred for too long, and once that line is drawn, it doesn't just affect one retreat in Australia, it affects everything moving forward, every appearance, every deal, every opportunity that even remotely touches that same sensitive space between title and transaction. And if that's true, then this isn't just fallout, it's a shift, a quiet one, a controlled one, but a shift nonetheless. And then came the most telling moment of all. Not an announcement, not a statement, but a change in perception, because suddenly the narrative around Meghan herself began to tilt. Not completely, not universally, but noticeably, because where there was once a mix of curiosity and admiration, there is now something sharper, something more skeptical, because once the word profit attaches itself to something as symbolic as a royal title, it changes how people see everything that follows, every move, every decision, every appearance. And perception, once cracked, is almost impossible to fully repair. Meanwhile, Harry's position in all of this has become complicated, to say the least, because while the focus remains heavily on Meghan and the event, there's an undercurrent of something else, something quieter but equally significant. The question of alignment, of agreement, of whether this direction, this path, is fully shared or simply followed, and insiders suggest that this is where the real tension might be building, not publicly, not visibly, but internally, where it matters most. And yet, despite all of this, despite the pressure, the whispers, the sudden distancing, the event hasn't disappeared. It lingers, like a test, like a moment suspended in time, waiting to see what happens next, because the real outcome of this situation won't be decided by headlines or petitions alone, it will be decided by what follows, by whether this becomes an isolated controversy or the beginning of a much larger shift in how these boundaries are enforced moving forward. And that's the part no one can fully predict yet. Because if the palace holds its line, if the distancing becomes policy, if the message from that secret meeting quietly solidifies into something permanent, then this moment, this petition, this event, this controversy will be remembered not as a scandal but as a turning point. But if not, if things settle, if the noise fades, if the lines blur again, then this was just another storm. Loud but temporary, dramatic but fleeting. And right now, the world is watching, not for what is said, but for what happens next. Because in stories like this, the truth isn't revealed in statements, it's revealed in consequences.